There were 13 different comic books on the newsstands with a cover date of February 1938. Feature Funnies number 5 featured a George Brenner cover. Parts of this issue were reprinted from the UK edition of Wags magazine from Editor's Press Service. Issues 27 from July 2nd, 1937, and issue 28 from July 9th, 1937. The cover by George Brenner featured the Bungle family. Highlights include Lollapalooza, a 4-page story from writer-artist Rube Goldberg, reprinting from the Frank J. Markey Syndicate. The superhero The Clock returned in a 7-page story from George E. Brenner, and it was a 7-page story, The Clock Strikes. And Will Eisner returned with Hawks of the Seas, a 4-page story he wrote and drew under the alias Willis Renzi, and this historical story was reprinted from Wags number 26. The Comics number 6, published by Dell Comics, February 1938, features a humor cover with the characters Wash Tubbs and Captain Easy. Rod Ryan of the Sky Police is an early science fiction story from writer Paul Jepson in a 4-page story. Gordon Fife and the Boy King are in a 3-page story from writer Bob Moore and artist Carl Pfeiffer. And My Big Brother is a 2-page story from writer-artist Frank Engley. The humor story by Engley, who was born November 10th, 1906, lived until 1977. He worked in the animation department of the Fleischer Studios in Manhattan. He worked on many cartoons with Popeye and Betty Boop. From 1934, he worked as a letterer and colorist on the comics by Milton Caniff and Noel Sickles, including Terry and the Pirates, Steve Canyon, and Scorchy Smith. He stayed with Caniff until his retirement in 1977. In addition to lettering work, he created his own strip in 1940, Rocky, the Stone Age Kid, for Comic Book Magazine, which was published by the Chicago Tribune. In 1946 and 47, he drew Looking Back, a strip distributed by Field Enterprises, and he also did some work for Harvey Comics. Did You Know is a 1-page story from writer-artist Joe Archibald. Archibald, born 1898, lived until 1989. He was a writer and artist for comic books from the 20s through the 50s. He worked as a reporter during the 20s and did art on syndicated features like Private Roads in 1930 and Saga of Steve West in 1928. He was present in the Funnies by Dell Comics in the late 1920s with features like Frosty Air, Lucky Duck, and Shylock Bones. In the 30s, he illustrated pulp novels and did art on fillers for comic books by National and DC Comics, such as Scrub Hardy, They Started Young, and Tinker Twins at Penn Point. From the late 40s through the 50s, he was editor, artist, and writer for Better Publications, illustrating sports features and stories with Space Cop Kelly and Ginny. Cap'n Cloud is a 2-page story from writer-artist Robert Weinstein. The adventure story by Weinstein. He illustrated the Captain Cloud Sunday page for George Matthew Adams Service in the mid-30s. In the early comic books by National and DC, he illustrated the features Cap'n Carrick and How to Build. Feature Books number 10 features Popeye and Susan, published by David McKay Publications, February 1938. The cover features Popeye and Olive Oil with art by LZ Cigar. This issue is totally dedicated to Popeye with 70 pages of Popeye strips, featuring the characters Popeye, Olive Oil, Susan Brown, the Jeep, Castor Oil, and Plastic Pan. It featured reprints from Popeye Daily newspaper strips from King Features from the summer of 1937. Ace Comics number 11 from David McKay Publications, February 1938. This historic issue includes the first appearance of the Phantom in comic books. It features a Joe Musial cover. Also, the Cats and Jabber Kids, Ripley's Believe It or Not, and Crazy Cat appear. The Phantom is a fictional costume crime fighter who operates from the fictional country of Bengala. The character was created by Lee Falk of the adventure comic strip The Phantom, which debuted in newspapers on February 17, 1936. The Phantom was later depicted in many forms of media. The Phantom appears here in a 4-page story written by Lee Falk with art by Ray Moore. This is an early superhero/jungle adventure story featuring the characters The Phantom and Diana Palmer, and it features reprints from King Features from November 1936 in the Phantom dailies. The cover art of this issue is by Joe Musial and features the Cats and Jammer Kids, Pete the Tramp, and Barney Google. Jungle Jim appears in a 4-page story from writer Don Moore with art by Alex Raymond in this Jungle story reprinted from the January 31st to February 21st, 1937 Sunday strips. And Blondie appears in a 4-page story from writer-artist Chick Young. Detective Comics number 12 from DC Comics, February 1938. The cover art is by Craig Flessel, another classic crime cover. There is a mile-high pedigree copy of this book from the Edgar Church collection, and there is also a Billy Wright pedigree copy. Speed Saunders appears in a 6-page story from writer-artist Craig Flessel. It features Ojibwa Indians as villains in this story. Counterfeit is a 6-page story from writer Vincent Sullivan with art by Craig Flessel. Larry Steele appears in 6 pages from writer-artist Will Eli. And Eli also gives us the 1-page short Floyd Stimson. Siegel and Schuster return with Spy, 4 pages long. And Slam Bradley returns in a lengthy 13-page story in their detective mystery featuring Slam Bradley and Shorty Morgan. The Funnies, number 17, published by Dell Comics, February 1938, features Sheldon Mayer artwork on the cover of the character Alley Oop. Dan Dunn appears in a 4-page story from writer-artist Norman Marsh. G-Man vs. the Red X is a 2-page story reprinted from the Big Little Book, G-Man vs. the Red X, from Whitman, 1936, issue 1147, with most of the text removed. Copyright Stephen Schlesinger. Don Dixon and the Hidden Empire return in a 2-page story from writer Bob Moore and artist Carl Pfeiffer. They also team up for Tad of the Tanbark in the 1-page story. Hal Forrest gives us Tailspin Tommy in 3 pages, as well as 4 Aces, a 1-page story. And Sheldon Mayer gives us Scribbly, 2 pages. Tip Top Comics, number 22, published by United Features Syndicate, February 1938. The cover art is by Al Cap, featuring his character Lil Abner. And Lil Abner appears in a 5-page story written and drawn by Cap. And Tarzan appears in a 6-page story from writer Edgar Rice Burroughs with arts by Hal Foster. King Comics number 23, published by David McKay Publications, February 1938. The cover is by Joe Musial and features Popeye and Henry. There is a mile-high pedigree copy of this book from the Edgar Church collection. New Adventure Comics number 24, published by DC Comics, February 1938. The cover art is by Craig Flessel and features 2 men in a canoe going through the rapids. There is a Cosmic Aeroplane pedigree copy of this book, likely the oldest comic book from that famous collection. This book is rated scarce on the Gerber Index. Dale Daring returns in a 2-page story from writer-artist Will Eli. The adventure story features the characters V, the Red Hatchet. Dale Daring, however, does not appear in this story. Federal Man returns in a 4-page story from Siegel and Schuster featuring the characters Steve Carson and the first appearance of Jerry Sefron. Nadir, Master of Magic, is a 4-page story from writer-artist Will Eli. And Boomerang Jones is an 8-page story from writer-artist Fred Gardenier, using the alias Stan Babcock. This is the only appearance of this strip featuring the first appearance of Boomerang Jones and Mungo. Robin Hood returns in a 4-page story from writer-artist Sven Elvin. And Steve Conrad Adventure is a 4-page story from Craig Flessel. Popular Comics number 25, published by Dell Comics, February 1938. Some of the highlight characters include Dick Tracy, Terry and the Pirates, Little Orphan Annie, The Gumps, Don Winslow, Skippy, Smitty, and Skeezix. Mickey Mouse Magazine number 29, which is Volume 3, number 5, published by Western Publishing, February 1938. This historic issue features the first Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs cover. It also is a Valentine's Day cover, and this is the 3rd appearance anywhere of Snow White. More Fun Comics number 29 from DC Comics, February 1938. Cover art is by Vincent Sullivan. Whitney Ellsworth is no longer listed as the associate editor on this title as of this issue. There is a mile-high pedigree copy of this book from the Edgar Church collection. Will Eli gave us the 3-page Sandra of the Secret Service story, a detective mystery, which was later reprinted in Double Action Comics number 2 from DC Comics, January 1940. Dr. Occult returns to the 4-page story from Siegel and Schuster under the alias Leaguer and Ruths in their fantasy supernatural story. It is also reprinted in Double Action Comics number 2 in 1940. Hanko the Cowhand is in a 2-page story, art by Craig Flessel, writer unknown. And Johnny Law is in a 4-page story from artist Will Eli, writer unknown. It is reprinted later in Double Action Comics number 2. Mark Marson of the Interplanetary Police returns in a 2-page story from writer-artist Tom Hickey. This early science fiction story features Mark Marson and Gail Hillary as the characters, and it is later reprinted in Double Action Comics number 2. Jack Woods appears in a 4-page story from artist Will Eli, and Pep Morgan returns in a 2-page story from artist Craig Flessel. This would be the last appearance of Pep Morgan until Action Comics number 1. Bradley Boys in the Wilderness is a 2-page story from artist Craig Flessel. Siegel and Schuster give us Radio Squad in a 2-page story. The detective mystery features the characters Sandy Keene and Roy. Blister is a lengthy 8-page story from writer Harold Sherman. And this is the only appearance of the character Blister. Harold Sitcherman, or Hal Sherman, born 1911, was a comics artist during the Golden Age of comics, a gag cartoonist present at National DC with the Star Spangled Kid, created with Jerry Siegel, and published in Star Spangled Comics during the 40s. He created a character called Wonder Woman in 1940, which he wanted to sell shortly before the Marston Peters character appeared. Sherman was also present in DC's Leading Comics and More Fun Comics, as well as better publication Startling Comics. He worked on Star Spangled Kid until June 1943 when he went into the service. After World War II, around 1946, he assisted Bernard Bailey on backgrounds of The Spectre. Later, he returned to gag cartooning. He also worked on the character Spooky over at Harvey Comics. Famous Funnies, number 43. From Eastern Color, February 1938, still the longest-running modern comic book at this time. Cover art by Victor Pazmino featuring the characters Sam Smithers and Uncle Elby. Highlights include Buck Rogers in a 4-page science fiction story from writer Phil Nolan and art by Dick Calkins. War on Crime returned in a 3-page story from writer Rex Collier, art possibly by Kemp Sterrett. This is the first modern crime genre story, continued issue to issue. And S.M. Iger gave us a 1-page Bobby story aimed at young readers, copyright Eisner Iger.